If being 5 minutes late gets you as much punishment as being 3 hours late, maybe it calls for some malicious compliance. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, no phones? Alright. I apologize beforehand if this is wordy or badly written, first time doing this. I work in a small restaurant, no more than 15 employees. The manager doesn't care if you check your phone, as long as all your work is done and it's slow, like 2 customers type deal. I rarely ever checked my phone during these times, and just listen to audiobooks and generally being left alone. And keep in mind, I'm a dishwasher/prep cook. I work all the way in the back where nobody can see me, customer-wise. We have another prep cook I'll keep as M. She's older and used to work in New York kitchens. She's quite short, so she asks me to get things off top shelves for her from time to time, even though she's extremely rude about it and will actively throw what I can only explain as elderly temper tantrums when you don't do as she says the very second she says it. I start getting tired of her treating me rudely and stop going completely out of my way to help her if I'm busy at that moment. Suddenly, my boss starts receiving these calls that customers are complaining that me, the guy who works all the way in the back, is on my phone all day. And after every time this happens, M comes in all grinny and smiling the next day. This goes on for several weeks until my boss confiscates everyone's phones at the start of the day because of too many complaints. Except M's, because she works on the days my boss is off, so she doesn't know she keeps hers. Now, I'm pretty resilient when it comes to people's BS, but when M starts following me out to my car in the morning, following me inside, and staring at me when I'm taking off my coat and doing stuff before clock and arms crossed, demanding I give her my phone, and bangs on the bathroom door when I'm using it while shaking the knob, and she clearly knows she has my phone since she just harassed me about it all morning. Okay. But where's yours? I say virtually every single day, with nothing as response but her shaking her hand at me. Alright, so I overhear her brother has been in the hospital lately, and she's pretty much walking around the restaurant on her phone the entire day every day. But the rule is everyone must comply, yes? The cabinet she keeps everyone's phones in locks shut at a button, and you need the key to open it. So when M went out for her morning smoke, I simply tossed it in the cabinet, moved everyone else's into a different cabinet, and then the one I tossed hers in, locked it closed, knowing fully dang well my boss has the only key and won't be back for at least a few days. I have never seen a fully grown woman go ape crap tearing down a restaurant looking for their phone that rapidly in my life. She eventually stormed over to me and demanded I tell her where her phone is. After searching and virtually tearing open every countertop and shelf, I told her I put it with the rest of them. And the look on her face was priceless as she realized she doesn't have a key. She's screaming at me now, asking why I did that. Well, you follow me around all day saying I need to follow the rules. I figured you should start setting a good example and do it yourself. I smile and get back to work quietly, pretty much listening to her kick and bang on the metal cabinet. Never knew what happened after that, except she follows the rule closely now and doesn't bother me anymore. I'm not gonna lie, I do feel kind of bad for her considering her brother was in the hospital, so it's a situation where you feel like you would give them at least a little slack. But I mean, if they had been bothering you for a long time, I don't know if I would have the heart to do what OP did is all I'm saying. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy awesome stories of malicious compliance, why not hit those like and subscribe buttons down below? That said, our next story is Unqualified Manager Tried to Save Costs. How a technicality accelerated them instead at a particle accelerator facility. I worked at a particle accelerator facility for several years, and one of the things we prided ourselves on was our meticulous attention to detail. When handling particles that moved near the speed of light, precision wasn't just desired, it was essential. Our facility had a maze of beam paths, allowing us to direct particle beams for different experiments. These paths could be long and winding, depending on the nature of the experiment. There was one important rule: the longer the beam path, the more expensive it was in terms of energy consumption. Enter Steve with a PhD in astrophysics. He was book smart but not an expert on particle accelerators, yet he took charge of our facility. His latest decree? Cutting costs. He sent a memo stating that all beam paths had to be optimized for the shortest distance between the start and end points. On the surface, this made sense. Shorter distances should mean less energy used. but those familiar with our work knew it wasn't always that straightforward. To ensure we were compliant, Steve demanded we send him a report detailing the distance of each experiment's beam path, and here's where it got interesting. He didn't specify whether he wanted the geometric or actual beam path. Spotting a chance for some malicious compliance, I decided to give Steve exactly what he asked for. I drafted a comprehensive report detailing the geometric distance of each path. These distances, of course, were significantly shorter than the actual paths the beams took. Steve, thinking he had uncovered massive inefficiencies, rushed to implement these optimized paths in a trial run without consulting the team, which was strictly against protocol. The result was catastrophic. Beams misfired, causing damage to sections of the facility and destroying expensive equipment. An emergency meeting was called. Dr. Johnson, a senior scientist, took the floor. "So, Steve, you didn't realize your paths had the beams running directly through walls and equipment?" She projected an overlay of the actual equipment layout against Steve's optimized paths, revealing the expensive shortcuts. Steve's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before, and he began to blame me for the debacle. I defended myself. That's exactly what I provided, thinking it was theoretical. I wasn't aware you'd bypass protocols and actually run the beam. The aftermath? I got off scot-free, while Steve was severely reprimanded and told to always follow protocol and to consult with experts. Many of us enjoyed a little paid vacation while the facility underwent some repairs. I mean, there's nothing wrong necessarily with a manager trying to find inefficiencies, it's just how they go about it. A manager in this position who clearly doesn't understand the inner workings of this stuff has to be able to rely on their team. Being bold and assertive like this might help you get to that position, but it can also make you look brilliantly like a fool very easy. Our next story is, wants me to work overtime but won't pay for it. I'm in the midst of leaving a truly terrible job. I've only been there for a year, but began noticing issues after the first month. Now, this is in healthcare, and we work with very vulnerable people, and I've seen some horrendous ethical issues and lack of competency among employees and my employer. For example, permitting clinicians to perform tasks they're not trained in, recommending treatments that are basically pseudoscience. Not to mention, my employer has no respect for boundaries or work-life balance, which are essential in this field if you want to avoid burnout, and has horrible work-life balance, time management, and organizational skills themselves, leading them to be behind on all work constantly with over 2,000 emails sitting in their inbox. This also resulted in much of my work being delayed and clients getting upset that they're waiting for things that the employer needs to do. Because of this incompetence, I get constant emails and texts asking me to work on off days, or my employer texting at 8 p.m. or 7 a.m. and expecting a reply. I've set very clear boundaries from the start that I don't work outside my hours, and have also raised concerns about ethics and competency issues, which resulted in my employer becoming defensive and emotional and changing nothing. Since giving my notice, the employer has been pushing boundaries even more. So, being the compliant human that I am, and because I do need to wrap up things that I've been waiting for my employer to get to for months, I began responding and including every single work-related communication outside of my hours, or requests for a small task that I need to complete on an off day as hours worked, and have banked up some nice overtime. Last week, the employer sent an email saying that I'm no longer allowed to work overtime, and every hour worked overtime will be banked as vacation time instead. I don't want that, because if I'm working overtime, I deserve to be paid for it. So I immediately stopped responding to anything after hours or on off days, and have been working only 8 hours on my scheduled days. The frustration and passive aggression coming from my employer since I did that is unmatched. Truly, they should get an award for the snarky and condescending emails and texts they've sent me. I only have a few days left, and will be filing an ethics complaint for the many egregious things I've seen once I'm out of there. It's what they deserve, and I can't wait. Are companies even allowed to just be like, "Oh, you know that overtime you worked? Sorry, it's now vacation time." Isn't that literally stealing money that you earned? There's definitely like an ethics complaint just on that alone. This next story is Accounting for Time Usage, Nerd Edition. Back in the mid-90s, I worked in an early website consultancy, Some decisions were made by upper management that were not inherently bad decisions, but when stacked, turned into a cluster freak. The first decision was to not sell products, but services, and to bill appropriately. I'm still convinced that they made this decision not because it was a better fit for the business or they could make more money that way, but because they were unable to define and price actual website products, so they stuck with billing clients for hours. But this is workable. Then there was an observation that the worker bees who built the websites, remember mid-90s, so no real tools to do this, and HTML markup was by hand, were not doing a good job of accounting for the hours spent, and therefore letting money slip through the company's hot little hands. A better method was needed to track hours. Spreadsheets would have worked just fine, but one upper management person got a bee in his bonnet about using some brand new software to do the job. We were put through hours of training by some bright-eyed customer reps, installed the software, and off we went. This software was crap. It also ran only on Windows, and this was a Mac shop, because web design on Windows at the time was not a thing. We had one Windows NT server, and the software got loaded onto it along with some other mission-critical stuff that also only ran on Windows. Then the staff got bullied into entering everything into the software. The software turned out to be an even bigger pile of crap than our websites. The backend did not have a mildly sophisticated database with a record-level locking. What does this mean? Usually, when you have a system where multiple people are expected to use it at once, you have a mediator that passes out permissions to edit only those bits you need while allowing other people to edit only those bits they need. This prevents people's changes from overriding each other while allowing them all to make changes at the same time without waiting for the last person to finish up. Based on actual observed performance, the software was blatting changes to a single file, so that if more than one person needed to enter data, they were waiting for the other person to finish up and the software to release the lock. This meant a huge performance bottleneck, which was made even worse by some impressively poor designs of the NT file system inherited from VMS, a system originally designed to run on room-sized computers where only a couple of people even in an organization even knew how to use them. On top of it, this server was doing other stuff, so it would metaphorically wander off and, say, print something, while some people were waiting for the time management software. What this looked like for the hapless web designers was that instead of entering their hours on projects as they went, they would hit the end of the day and realize they needed to enter their hours, something they'd been too busy to do because they'd been overworked all day trying to make websites. Then, as everyone else tried to enter their hours, they ended up staring at spinning beach balls on their screen as time ticked by, waiting for everyone else to finish entering their hours. If you walked around the office at the end of the day, you saw people staring at their monitors with glazed expressions, occasionally moving the mouse fitfully. As an IT person, I was one of the few worker bee level people who had permissions to create categories for timekeeping, so I created one for entering your hours in software so that people could account for their time waiting for the software to let them record their billable hours. Naturally, time spent entering your hours was not billable. Entries to that category skyrocketed as people noticed it. I have no idea what happened after that as I left the company. How much do you guys want to bet that even after OP left the company, and even after they tried to do something that would bring awareness to how much time was being wasted, they still tried to fit that square peg in the round hole? This next story is, same punishment for being 5 minutes late as being 3 hours late? Sure, no problem. So I'm working for a low-level corporation, about 450 employees. I've been there for 5 years and have risen to the top of my department's productivity levels. I mention this as it does pertain to the story. Management had a policy that latecomers would be penalized, but that lateness could be excused under some circumstances. I was good at my job, and I actually loved doing it, so I was more or less a dream employee. I always showed up to work 20 to 30 minutes early because I liked to sit in the lunchroom and prepare for my day. Management knew I was almost always early, so if I was late from time to time, and such instances were rare, they'd let it slide, as there was always a valid reason. Now, for some other employees, this latitude wasn't applied. Chronically late employees would get written up and not have their constant lateness excused. They'd complain, of course, but management was firm. They ran an actual meritocracy, where more productive employees would experience preferential treatment. Then the business gets sold and we get new management, an international corp only interested in buying us up, stripping us down, and selling off the company. Of course, they denied this constantly, but the fact that over the next 2 years, they stripped us down and sold off the company proved they were lying. New management comes in and has to make a bunch of idiotic changes. One of those changes is that no reasons for being late are accepted regardless of validity. Anyone 5+ minutes late for work would be written up. So at the team meeting where this is explained, I asked, so if someone is 5 minutes late and someone else is 3 hours late, the punishment is the same? And they said yes. From that day on, I stopped coming in early. I'd still head to work at my usual time, but I sat in a local coffee shop instead of my work's lunchroom. This meant that my work missed out because in the past, I would often help out by answering questions, even start work early if needed, because I loved my job, and the old management were wonderful bosses. No more of that under new management. In fact, if something happened, like unexpectedly bad traffic, and I was going to end up being a few minutes late, I'd just say, freak it. If being 3 hours late is the same punishment as 5 minutes late, I'd just decide to come in later. I'd call work to tell them I was delayed, then go out and have a leisurely meal in a restaurant, or run some personal errands, go shopping, even see a movie, etc. Depending on my mood and how crappy the new management had been lately, what would have been, say, a 7-minute lateness on my part would end up seeing me roll in 3 hours late. Sure, it cost me a few bucks, but I made almost as much in bonuses than I did in hourly salary. So missing out on a few hours here and there didn't bother me too much. I'd come in 3 or 4 hours late, and my new bosses would be fuming. Nothing they could do though but write me up for the basic tardy, same as they would have if I was 5 minutes late. I mean, I get it for people who are chronically late, but like you would think that they would have a little bit of leniency if you're 5-10 minutes late. Like what's the big deal? Unless there's like something that is vitally important that day. Why give a worker such a hard time for just being minutes late? But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another awesome malicious compliance story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.